Hello everyone, and welcome back to Snowbound Screams Tonight. We travel into the forgotten backroads of America. Places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Our journey takes us deep into the heart of Louisiana, into the bayous and swamps where the line between land and water blurs. And so too, it seems, does the line between our world and something else. We will be examining a series of official radio communications, logged and archived, that document encounters which defy all logical explanation. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. These are not campfire tales passed down through generations. They are the frantic, confused, and sometimes terrifyingly calm words of law enforcement officers, trained observers who found themselves face to face with the unknown in the line of duty. These logs from the Iberia, St. Martin, and St. Mary Parish Sheriff's Departments span several decades. They detail strange lights in the sky, unidentified figures in the mist, and sounds from the water that have no known source. They speak of disappearances and discoveries that leave more questions than answers. We will present them to you as they were recorded, with names changed to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was a humid September night in 2012 when Deputy Mark LeBlanc drove the late shift along Highway 31, a stretch of road he knew as well as his own heartbeat. After 8 years with the St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Department, the Bayou's sights and smells were second nature. The cypress knees jutting like teeth from black water, the swamp's heavy scent of wet earth and decay, the moss swaying like torn shrouds in his headlights. It was 2:17 a.m. A steady drizzle tapped against the cruiser, the wipers keeping rhythm as LeBlanc thought of coffee and the end of a long shift. Then the rain thickened into a downpour, and visibility shrank to a narrow tunnel of light. And that's when he saw it. At first he assumed it was a deer, but the shape was wrong. Too tall, too thin. A humanoid silhouette stood motionless at the roadside, pale and reed-limbed, its color a washed-out gray that seemed to absorb his headlights. LeBlanc slowed to a crawl, pulse ticking upward. The figure didn't move. It stood like a statue carved from fog. He stopped the cruiser and radioed in. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7. I've got a pedestrian near mile marker 17. No vehicles nearby, no breakdowns reported." As dispatch waited for a description, the figure began to move. It didn't walk. It glided, soundless, across the ditch, drifting into the center of the highway. Its long arms hung unnaturally low, and its head was disproportionately large, its face marked only by dark, expressionless voids where eyes should be. "Dispatch. Individual is now in the roadway," he said, voice tightening. He activated the PA system. "Move to the shoulder. You're creating a hazard." The figure continued forward, ignoring the command entirely. 50 feet, 40, 30. A cold knot formed in LeBlanc's stomach. His instincts screamed that this was neither lost nor human. The rain hammered the cruiser, but somehow the world felt silent, as if sound itself had thinned. Then he heard it, a deep, low thrumming, not from the road, not from the engine, but from the figure. "Dispatch, it's approaching my vehicle," he said, barely audible. "Mark, what's the nature of—" "It's not human," he whispered. The figure stopped directly before the cruiser, filling the windshield. A wave of icy air seeped through the glass, chilling him to the bone. His breath misted. The vibrations grew stronger, rattling up from the floorboards. LeBlanc's hand hovered at the door handle, training urging him to step out, instinct warning him not to. He froze, unable to move. Then, it vanished. No motion, no blur, no sound. One instant it was there. The next, the headlights illuminated nothing but rain. The thrumming went silent. Normal sound rushed back. The engine, the storm, his own ragged breathing. "Dispatch, Unit 7. He managed. "The individual has departed the scene." When backup arrived 10 minutes later, they found him pale and trembling, but unhurt. A search of the area revealed nothing. No footprints, no drag marks, no disturbed vegetation. The rain had washed the shoulder clean, as though nothing had ever stood there. The official report listed an unidentified individual who fled the scene. But in a private supplemental statement, LeBlanc described exactly what he saw, using words like translucent, non-human, and gliding. Among the deputies, the story quietly became known as the Highway 31 Phantom. Another reminder that the Bayou's nights obey rules of their own. LeBlanc never worked nights again. His transfer to day shift was approved discreetly. He never spoke of the encounter except to a few fellow officers who carried their own unexplainable stories. The log entry remains in the archives, silent, unsettling, and unsolved. It was a late October evening in 2016. Deputy David Carter and his K9 partner, a German shepherd named Rex, were conducting a routine patrol of a defunct rail line near the Vermilion River. The tracks, abandoned for decades, were a known spot for illicit dumping and occasional trespassing. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. Rust had consumed the rails, and kudzu strangled the telegraph poles, creating a corridor of green and gray that felt lost to time. Carter walked the tracks with a heavy flashlight, Rex trotting obediently at his side, his ears perked at the chirping of the crickets. It was a quiet, peaceful patrol, the kind of mundane duty that filled the long hours of a night shift. The first sign of wrongness was a low, mournful whistle that echoed through the trees. It sounded like a train, a deep, melancholic blast from a bygone era. Carter stopped, shining his light down the tracks. The line was dead, the rails rusted and broken. There hadn't been a train on this route in over 40 years. Rex let out a low whine, his tail tucking between his legs as he pressed against Carter's leg. "Easy, boy," Carter murmured, his own sense of unease growing. The air grew suddenly, unnaturally cold, and the familiar hum of the swamp cicadas ceased, plunging the area into a profound and unsettling silence. He keyed his radio to report the strange sound, but the handset emitted only a high-pitched squeal of static. He looked at his watch. The hands were frozen, unmoving. He looked back down the tracks, and his blood ran cold. The rusted rails under his feet now gleamed with a faint, oily sheen, as if newly laid. The air shimmered, and the decaying telegraph poles seemed to straighten, their glass insulators glowing with a soft, internal light. A faint light appeared down the line, growing steadily brighter, accompanied by the rhythmic chuff-chuff-chuff of an approaching steam engine. Carter, a man who had faced down armed criminals, felt a primal, ice-cold terror seize him. He didn't wait to see the train. He grabbed Rex's collar and ran, not stopping until he was safely in his cruiser, speeding away without once looking in his rearview mirror. He logged the patrol as all clear. The official report makes no mention of a train whistle or a temporal anomaly. It simply notes that Deputy Carter's radio and watch malfunctioned due to an unspecified electrical surge. Rex, once a fearless police dog, would never again go near a railway, and would panic at the sound of any whistle. The tracks were officially pulled up in 1972. It was the spring of 2005. Sergeant Helen Dubois was a veteran of the St. Mary Parish Sheriff's Department's Marine Division. She had spent most of her 20-year career on the water, in a flat-bottomed patrol boat, navigating the labyrinthine network of bayous, canals, and lakes that defined the landscape. She knew the calls of the birds, the habits of the alligators, and the moods of the water. She was a practical woman, grounded in the realities of her job, rescuing boaters in distress, apprehending drug runners, and enforcing fishing regulations. She had little time for superstition or the spooky stories that tourists love to share. But even she had to admit that there were places in the Atchafalaya Basin that felt older and stranger than others. One such place was Grand Lake, a vast, shallow expanse of water choked with cypress trees and thickets of reeds. It was a place where it was easy to get lost, where the mist clung to the water in the early morning, and the sounds of the outside world seemed to fade away. On the morning of May 7th, Dubois and her partner, Deputy Ben Carter, were called out to a report of a missing fisherman. An elderly man, Alphonse Landry, had gone out in his small john boat the previous afternoon and had not returned. His wife had reported him missing when he didn't come home by dark. The search began at dawn. Dubois and Carter, in their patrol boat, joined a small flotilla of other law enforcement and volunteer rescue vessels. They crisscrossed the area where Landry was last seen, their eyes scanning the water and the shoreline for any sign of the man or his boat. The sun was a pale disk behind a layer of gray clouds, its light doing little to burn off the thick mist that hung over the lake. The air was cool and damp, carrying the scent of mud and rotting leaves. The only sounds were the putter of the boat motors and the occasional cry of a heron. It was a somber, methodical search, the kind of grim work that Dubois had done many times before. They had been searching for nearly 3 hours when Carter, who was at the helm, cut the engine. "What's up?" Dubois asked, looking up from the map she was studying. "Listen," Carter said, his voice low. Dubois fell silent, straining her ears. At first, she heard nothing but the gentle lapping of water against the hull of the boat. Then she heard it, a faint sound carried on the breeze. It sounded like whispering. It was a soft, sibilant sound, like the rustling of 1,000 dry leaves, but it had a rhythm to it, a cadence that was almost like speech. It seemed to be coming from a dense thicket of reeds about 100 yards away, near the western shore of the lake. "Probably just the wind in the reeds," Dubois said, though she knew it wasn't. There was barely a breeze. "Yeah," Carter said, his eyes fixed on the thicket. "Probably." Dubois picked up the binoculars and scanned the shoreline. The reeds were tall and thick, a wall of green and brown that rose from the water's edge. She couldn't see anything moving, but the whispering continued, a soft, insistent murmur that seemed to be getting closer. She could feel a strange tension in the air, a sense of being watched. The hair on her arms stood up. "Dispatch, this is Marine Unit 4, she said into her radio, her voice steady despite the unease she felt. "We are at the north end of Grand Lake, investigating a sound near the western shore." Over. A crackle of static, then the dispatcher's voice. "Copy that, Marine 4. What kind of sound?" Dubois hesitated. How could she describe it? "It's an unidentifiable vocalization, possible wildlife. We're going to take a closer look." She didn't want to say whispering. It sounded too crazy, too unprofessional. Carter restarted the engine and slowly guided the boat towards the shore, the whispering growing louder with every yard. It was a strange, polyphonic sound, with what seemed like dozens of voices overlapping, though the words, if there were any, were unintelligible. It was a sound that didn't belong in the Louisiana swamp, didn't sound like animals or the wind. It sounded like people. But there were no people out here. They were alone in this part of the lake. As they drew closer to the reeds, the boat's propeller churning up the muddy water, the whispering suddenly stopped. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. It was a heavy, absolute silence, as if a switch had been flipped. Carter cut the engine again. The boat drifted the last few feet, its bow nudging into the dense thicket of reeds. Dubois and Carter sat there, listening, watching. Nothing moved. The mist swirled around them, obscuring the shoreline. "I'm going to take a look," Carter said, grabbing a paddle and preparing to step out of the boat into the shallow water. "No," Dubois said, her voice sharp. "Stay in the boat. We don't know what's in there." Carter looked at her, his face pale in the gray light. He could feel it too. The wrongness of the place. The air was cold, much colder than it should have been on a spring morning. Dubois stood up in the boat, her hand on the butt of her service pistol. She peered into the thicket, her eyes straining to see through the mist and the tangled reeds. And then she saw it. A shape, half hidden by the vegetation. It was small and pale. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a mix of fear and professional duty. "Mr. Landry?" she called out, her voice loud in the silence. "Alphonse Landry, are you there?" The shape did not move. Dubois took a step closer, her boots sinking into the soft mud of the lake bed. "Sarge, be careful," Carter whispered from behind her. Dubois ignored him, her attention focused on the shape. As she got closer, she saw that it wasn't a person. It was a doll, a small porcelain doll, its face cracked and stained with age. It was dressed in a tattered lace dress, and its glass eyes stared up at her with a vacant, unnerving gaze. It was lying, half submerged in the mud, one of its porcelain arms broken off. It was a strange, out-of-place object to find in the middle of a swamp. But it was just a doll, a lost toy perhaps, tossed from a boat years ago. Dubois felt a wave of relief, followed by a pang of disappointment. She had let the strange sounds and the eerie atmosphere get to her. It was just a doll. She was about to turn back to the boat when she heard it again. The whispering. But this time, it wasn't coming from the reeds in front of her. It was coming from behind her, from the boat. She spun around. Carter was standing in the boat, his back to her, facing the open water. He was perfectly still. "Ben?" she called out. He didn't answer. The whispering seemed to be emanating from him. It was a soft, sibilant sound, like a voice speaking a language she didn't understand. "Ben, what's going on?" Dubois said, her hand now firmly on her pistol. She started to move back towards the boat, her heart pounding in her chest. Carter slowly turned his head. His eyes were wide, his face a mask of terror. "It's in the water," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the strange sound. "All around us." Dubois looked down into the water. It was dark and murky, but she could see shapes moving beneath the surface. Not fish, not alligators. They were long, pale shapes, like limbs, reaching up from the depths. The whispering grew louder, a cacophony of sibilant voices that seemed to be coming from the water itself. The air grew even colder, and a foul smell, like rot and decay, rose from the lake. Dubois felt a primal fear, a terror that was older and more powerful than any she had ever known. She scrambled back into the boat, her movements clumsy and desperate. "Get us out of here, Ben, now!" she yelled. Carter didn't need to be told twice. He fumbled with the pull cord, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grip it. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. He slammed the throttle forward, and the boat lurched away from the shore, plowing through the water, leaving the whispering reeds behind. They didn't stop until they were a mile away, the engine screaming in protest. Carter finally cut the motor, and they both collapsed onto the benches, gasping for breath. The silence that rushed in was a welcome relief. They didn't speak for a long time. They just sat there, staring at each other, the unspoken terror hanging between them. They never told the full story in their official report. They simply stated that they had found the missing fisherman's boat, capsized and empty, near the western shore of the lake. They made no mention of the whispering, the doll, or the shapes in the water. Alphonse Landry's body was never found. The case was officially listed as a probable drowning. But Dubois and Carter knew better. They had encountered something in the mist-shrouded waters of Grand Lake, something ancient and malevolent that had no name. They never returned to that part of the lake again. The whispering reeds of Grand Lake held a secret they were content to leave undisturbed. The official log for that day notes a strange auditory phenomenon and the discovery of the fisherman's empty boat. The rest was left unsaid, a story shared only between two deputies who had looked into the dark heart of the bayou and seen something looking back. The vastness of the American landscape holds many secrets, but few are as impenetrable as the depths of its waterways. Our next account shifts from the natural to the seemingly man-made, a place where the rules of physics seem to take a brief, inexplicable holiday. It was the early morning hours of October 31st, 2008. Deputy Raymond Boudreau of the Iberia Parish Sheriff's Department was finishing his patrol. The night had been quiet, unusually so for a Halloween. A few prank calls, a couple of noise complaints, nothing more. Boudreau was looking forward to the end of his shift, to the warmth of his bed and the end of a long, uneventful night. He was driving south on Highway 14, a straight, flat road that cut through the sugarcane fields and small, sleepy towns of Iberia Parish. The sky was clear, dotted with stars. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the sweet, smoky scent of burning cane from the nearby fields. Boudreau had the radio on, tuned to a classic rock station, the volume low. It was just after 3 a.m. He was thinking about coffee and the crossword puzzle he would do when he got home. He was just passing the outskirts of the small town of Jeanneret when he saw it. At first, he thought it was an aircraft. A bright light hovering low in the sky, off to the east, over the vast, dark expanse of the Atchafalaya Basin. It was a brilliant, white light, much brighter than any star. It wasn't moving. It was just there. Boudreau had seen all sorts of strange lights in the sky over the years. Flares from oil rigs, helicopters from the Coast Guard, even the occasional weather balloon. But this was different. It was too still, too bright, and too low. He slowed down, his eyes fixed on the light. It didn't flicker or pulse. It was a steady, unwavering beacon in the night sky. He watched it for a full minute, waiting for it to move, to change, to do something. It didn't. It just hung there, silent and immobile. Boudreau picked up his radio handset. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. I'm on Highway 14, just south of Jeanneret. I'm observing a strange light in the eastern sky. Over." The dispatcher, a woman named Maria, came back on the line almost immediately. "Copy that, Unit 12. Can you describe the light?" Boudreau squinted, trying to get a better look. "It's a very bright, white light. Stationary. Low on the horizon. It's not a plane or a helicopter. There are no navigation lights, no sound." He paused, watching the light. "It's just there." There was a moment of silence on the other end. "Roger that, Unit 12. We're not showing any air traffic in that sector. Can you estimate the distance and direction?" Boudreau pulled over to the side of the road, stopping his cruiser. He wanted to give this his full attention. I'd say it's about 10 to 15 miles east of my position, over the basin. As he was speaking to dispatch, the light began to change. It started to descend, slowly at first, then more rapidly. It dropped towards the dark, swampy ground below, a brilliant white streak against the black sky. Boudreaux felt a jolt of adrenaline. This was not a flare. Flares didn't move like this. Dispatch, the light is descending. It's moving at a high rate of speed. He kept his voice calm, professional, but his heart was starting to beat a little faster. Copy that, Unit 12. Are you still on Highway 14? Affirmative, dispatch. I'm pulled over at mile marker 8. Stand by, Unit 12. I'm contacting the FAA to see if they have any radar contacts in that area. Boudreaux watched as the light continued its descent. It was getting closer to the ground, its brilliance illuminating the tops of the cypress trees in the distance. He could see a faint, glowing trail behind it, like the wake of a boat on a dark lake. Then, just as it seemed about to hit the trees, the light stopped. It hovered again, about 100 feet above the swamp. It was no longer a brilliant white. It had changed color, shifting to a deep, pulsating red. It hung there for a moment, a crimson orb in the darkness. Then, without warning, it shot back up into the sky, ascending even faster than it had descended. In a matter of seconds, it was a tiny speck. Then it vanished completely. The whole event, from the moment it started to descend to the moment it disappeared, had lasted less than 30 seconds. Boudreaux sat there in his cruiser, the engine idling, staring at the empty patch of sky where the light had been. He was speechless. He had never seen anything move with such speed and agility. It defied the laws of physics as he understood them. Dispatch, this is Unit 12, he said into the radio, his voice a little shaky. The object has departed the area. It shot straight up into the air and disappeared. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. He could imagine the dispatcher at her console trying to make sense of his report. Copy that, Unit 12, she finally said, her voice measured. The FAA reports no radar contacts, civilian or military, in that sector at any time tonight. Do you wish to file an official report? Boudreaux thought for a moment. He knew what would happen if he filed a report. He would be the butt of jokes at the station, the guy who saw a UFO on Halloween. But he also knew he had a duty to report what he had seen. Affirmative, dispatch. I'll file a report when I get back to the station. When he returned to the station, he sat down with his supervisor, Captain Leroy, and recounted the event. Captain Leroy, a gruff, no-nonsense man who had been with the department for 30 years, listened patiently, his face an unreadable mask. When Boudreaux was finished, Leroy leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. Raymond, he said, his voice low, I've been a cop in this parish for a long time. I've seen things I can't explain. Lights in the sky, strange sounds in the swamp, things that don't fit into our neat little boxes. He paused, looking Boudreaux straight in the eye. We file the report, we log it, and then we move on. There are some things in this world, Raymond, that we are not meant to understand. The Bayou has its secrets, and it's best not to ask too many questions. The report was filed under Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. It was a short, factual account of what Boudreaux had seen. It noted the time, the location, and the description of the light and its movements. It also noted the FAA's confirmation of no air traffic in the area. The report was filed away in a cabinet in the basement of the sheriff's department. where it gathered dust for years. Boudreaux never spoke of it again, not to his fellow officers, not to his family. But he never forgot it. He would often find himself looking up at the night sky, searching for that brilliant, impossible light. He never saw it again. But he knew it was out there. A reminder that even in the most familiar places, there are mysteries that lie just beyond the edge of our understanding. The official log for that night remains, a cryptic entry in the annals of the Iberia Parish Sheriff's Department, a testament to a light that danced in the sky and then vanished, leaving behind only questions and a sense of quiet wonder. The American sky is a canvas for the unknown, but sometimes the most unsettling encounters are not in the heavens above, but on the solid ground of a small town, where the fabric of a community can be torn by a single, inexplicable event. Our next story takes us from the vastness of the basin to the confines of a local legend that proved to be terrifyingly real. It was a chilly December night in 2015 when rookie Deputy Chloe Thibodeau began her first solo patrol in the far reaches of St. Martin Parish. Fresh out of the academy, she still believed the world operated neatly under law, training, and procedure. But Bayou Sorrel, isolated deep inside the Atchafalaya Basin, was not a place that obeyed rules. Locals kept to themselves, and their superstitions ran older than the parish lines. Her training officer, Gerard, had warned her. "They have their stories down there, Chloe. Listen if you must, but don't let them get to you." The night was cold, still, and startlingly clear. A full moon washed silver light across the black water, and Thibodeau crawled down the narrow road, cabins on stilts barely visible beyond her headlights. With no streetlights, no people, and no backup within miles, the quiet felt less peaceful and more like being watched by the swamp itself. Just after midnight, dispatch crackled through. Unit 14. Disturbance near the old Boudreaux place. Caller reports a woman crying. Her stomach tightened. The Boudreaux cabin had been abandoned for years, a place avoided even in daylight. Rumors called it haunted. Thibodeau chalked it up to folklore. But dread pressed on her as she turned onto the overgrown gravel driveway, trees forming a canopy that swallowed the moonlight. The cabin appeared like a skeleton in the dark, porch sagging, windows boarded, the air unnervingly still. She stepped out, hand hovering near her pistol. "Sheriff's Department. Anyone here?" Silence. A sweep around the cabin showed only decay. Dust, cobwebs, and a hollow stillness untouched by life. She lifted her radio, ready to call it in as a false alarm, when she heard it. A woman crying, soft at first, then heartbreakingly raw. Thibodeau followed the sound to the bayou's edge. A woman in a long white gown stood with her back to her, hair hanging like a curtain, rocking as she sobbed. Something about her was wrong. Her dress old-fashioned, her sobbing too deep, too echoing, too unnatural. "Ma'am," Thibodeau called. "I'm with the Sheriff's Department." The woman didn't turn. "Ma'am, show me your hands." The crying stopped instantly. Slowly, the woman turned. Her face was swallowed in shifting shadow, but her eyes, empty black voids, locked onto Thibodeau. They weren't eyes meant for anything living. A silent scream stretched the woman's mouth open, and a thick black mist poured out, swirling into a tall figure with claw-like hands. A wave of hatred, cold and ancient, hit Thibodeau so hard she staggered. She ran. Blind with terror, she fumbled into her cruiser, engine roaring as she flew back toward the main road. She didn't radio it in. Who would believe it? By the time she reached the station, she could barely breathe. She requested a transfer the next morning. Weeks later, Gerard pulled her aside, voice low. "You saw her, didn't you? The crying lady." Thibodeau could only nod. "You're not the first," he said, "and you won't be the last." The official log listed the call as a false alarm, the caller never identified. But among locals, the crying lady of Bayou sorrel remained a whispered warning. Some grief, they said, was so deep it refused to stay buried. Deputy Thibodeau resigned less than a year later and moved north, far from the bayou. But the nightmares continued. The white dress, the shaking shoulders, and those endless, devouring eyes. Because in the bayou, sorrow lives long. And sometimes, it still walks. It was a sweltering August night in 2018. Sergeant Henri Girard was a man who was as much a part of the St. Martin Parish landscape as the cypress trees and the alligators. He had been with the sheriff's department for over 25 years, a veteran of countless patrols, investigations, and rescues in the treacherous beauty of the Atchafalaya Basin. He was a quiet, competent man, with a deep knowledge of the swamp and its people. He had seen it all, or so he thought. He had trained rookies like Chloe Thibodeau, guiding them through the complexities of bayou law enforcement. And he had a reputation for being unflappable in the face of danger. But even he could not have prepared for the events of that hot, humid August night. A night that would see him become the subject of one of the most baffling mysteries in the parish's history. Girard was on a routine patrol, a solo sweep of the remote backroads north of Henderson. It was a quiet night, the air thick with the sound of cicadas and frogs. The moon was a hazy crescent in the sky, its light filtered through the dense canopy of the trees. Girard was driving his familiar route, the curves of the road etched into his muscle memory. He was thinking about his upcoming fishing trip, a rare weekend off he was planning to spend with his grandson. It was just after 1 a.m. He was on a lonely stretch of road, surrounded by the dark, silent swamp. He had just passed a small, abandoned church, its steeple a ghostly silhouette against the sky, when his cruiser's engine began to sputter. The coughing and spluttering of the engine was a sudden, violent intrusion into the quiet night. The cruiser lurched, then died, the headlights cutting out, plunging Girard into near-total darkness. The only light came from the dim glow of the dashboard and the sliver of the moon. "Well, that's just great," Girard muttered to himself. He grabbed the radio handset. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. My engine has cut out on Highway 351, just north of the old St. Joseph's Church. I'm going to need a tow." "Copy that, Unit 3. The dispatcher's voice crackled over the radio. "ETA on the tow truck is about 45 minutes. Are you in a safe location?" Girard looked around. The road was deserted, the swamp pressing in on all sides. "As safe as I can be, dispatch," he said. "I'll just wait here." He sat in the darkened cruiser, the only sound the incessant chirping of the crickets. He decided to take a look under the hood, just in case it was something simple he could fix himself. He grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight and stepped out of the car. The air was hot and humid, like a wet blanket. He popped the hood and aimed his flashlight at the engine. Everything looked normal. He couldn't see any obvious problems. He was about to give up and just wait for the tow truck when he heard a sound. It was a faint, rhythmic, splashing sound, coming from the swamp just beyond the ditch on the side of the road. It sounded like someone walking through the water. "Hello?" he called out, his voice echoing in the darkness. "Is someone there?" There was no answer, but the splashing sound continued. It was a steady, unhurried rhythm. Splash, pause, splash, pause. It was getting closer. Girard felt a prickle of unease. It was late, and this was a deserted stretch of road. He shone his flashlight towards the sound, its powerful beam cutting through the darkness. The light hit the surface of the water, illuminating the lily pads and cypress knees. He could see nothing moving. He swept the beam back and forth, but the swamp was still. The splashing sound, however, continued. It was closer now, just a few yards away. Gerard could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. This was not an animal. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. He pulled his service pistol from its holster, his heart starting to beat a little faster. "I'm a sheriff's deputy," he yelled into the darkness. "Show yourself." The splashing sound stopped. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Gerard stood there, his pistol raised, his flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the swamp. He waited, his senses on high alert. A minute passed. Then another. Nothing. He began to relax, telling himself he was just spooked. It was probably just a gator or a wild hog. He was about to lower his weapon when he saw it. A ripple in the water, about 20 yards away. It was not the kind of ripple made by a fish or a frog. It was a large, deliberate disturbance, as if something heavy had just broken the surface of the water. He aimed his flashlight at the ripple. The beam hit the water, and for a moment, he saw something. A shape just beneath the surface. It was large and dark, much larger than a man. It had a long, serpentine body, and what looked like limbs, multiple limbs, propelling it through the water. Then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it was gone, disappearing into the murky depths. Gerard stood there, frozen, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered in his 25 years in the swamp. It was not an alligator, not a snake, not any creature he knew. It was something else. Something ancient and alien. He backed away from the ditch, his eyes never leaving the dark water. He got back into his cruiser, locking the doors behind him. He was no longer concerned about his broken-down engine. He was concerned about the thing in the water. He grabbed the radio handset, his hand shaking slightly. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I have a situation here. I need backup. Now." "Copy that. Unit 3." The dispatcher's voice replied, a note of urgency in her tone. "What is your situation?" Gerard hesitated, trying to find the right words. I saw something in the swamp, something large in the water. It's not a gator." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Roger that. Unit 3, backup is on the way. ETA is 15 minutes. Gerard sat in the darkened cruiser, his pistol in his lap, his eyes fixed on the ditch. The next 15 minutes were the longest of his life. He heard no more splashing, saw no more ripples. The swamp was silent, watchful. He felt a primal fear, a terror that was cold and sharp. He was a seasoned law enforcement officer, a man who had faced down armed criminals and dangerous animals. But this was different. This was a fear of the unknown, a fear of something that defied all logic and reason. Finally, he saw the flashing lights of the backup cruiser in the distance. He felt a wave of relief wash over him. He was not alone anymore. The backup cruiser, driven by a young deputy named Marc LeBlanc, pulled up behind Gerard's stalled vehicle. LeBlanc got out of his car, his hand on his pistol. "Sarge, you okay?" Gerard got out of his car, his legs feeling a little unsteady. "I'm okay, Mark. But I saw something out there, in the water." He pointed towards the ditch. LeBlanc aimed his flashlight towards the swamp, his eyes scanning the darkness. "I don't see anything, Sarge." "It's gone now," Gerard said. "But it was there. Big, dark, not like anything I've ever seen." LeBlanc looked at Gerard, a concerned expression on his face. He knew Gerard was not a man who was easily spooked. "Okay, Sarge. I believe you." Let's just wait for the tow truck and get out of here." They stood by their cruisers, their backs to the road, their eyes on the swamp. The tow truck arrived a few minutes later, its bright lights cutting through the darkness. The driver, a friendly man named Boudreau, got out and hooked up the stalled cruiser. Girard and LeBlanc stood by, watching. As the tow truck was about to pull away, Girard felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to take one last look into the swamp. He walked to the edge of the road, his flashlight in hand. He shone the beam into the water, one last time. And there it was. Two eyes, glowing a faint, phosphorescent green, staring back at him from the darkness. They were not the eyes of a gator. They were too large, too intelligent, too alien. They held his gaze for a moment, then slowly sank beneath the water, disappearing without a ripple. Girard stumbled back, his face pale. "Did you see that?" he yelled to LeBlanc. "See what, Sarge?" LeBlanc replied, his flashlight beam sweeping the empty water. "The eyes, the green eyes." LeBlanc saw nothing. Girard knew what he had to do. He walked over to LeBlanc. "Mark, I'm going to walk back to the station. It's not far. I need some air." LeBlanc looked at him, concerned. "Are you sure, Sarge? I can give you a ride." "No, I'm good," Girard said, his voice firm. "I just need to walk." He turned and started walking down the dark, deserted road, his figure quickly swallowed by the night. LeBlanc watched him walk away, his flashlight beam bobbing in the darkness until it was swallowed by the swamp. LeBlanc stood there for a moment, a strange feeling of unease settling over him. He wanted to call out, to tell Girard to get in the truck, but something stopped him. He watched the tow truck pull away, taking Girard's cruiser with it, leaving him alone on the dark, deserted road. He got back into his own cruiser, but he didn't leave. He just sat there, waiting for Girard to arrive at the station. He never did. When Girard didn't arrive at the station within the expected 30 minutes and didn't answer his radio, concern turned to alarm. A full-scale search was launched at dawn. Deputies, K-9 units, and a helicopter from the state police scoured the area around Highway 351. They found nothing. There were no footprints in the soft mud at the side of the road, other than their own. There was no sign of a struggle. It was as if Sergeant Henri Girard had simply walked off the face of the earth. The K-9 units followed a scent trail from the road to the edge of the swamp. But then they lost it. The dogs whined and refused to go any further, their hackles raised, their tails tucked between their legs. They could smell something in the water, something that terrified them. The search went on for 3 days. They dragged the canal, they combed the swamp, they interviewed every resident for miles around. There was no trace of him. Henri Girard, a man who knew the Bayou better than anyone, had vanished without a trace. The official explanation was that he had, for some unknown reason, walked into the swamp and had become disoriented and drowned. It was a weak explanation, and everyone knew it. Girard was an expert navigator. He would never have gotten lost. And he would never have walked into the swamp at night, especially after reporting a strange creature in the water. The deputies who knew him, who had worked with him for years, knew there was more to the story. They had seen the look on his face when he talked about the thing in the water. It was a look of pure, unadulterated terror. The case of Sergeant Henri Girard remains open, listed as a missing person. But in the hearts and minds of the St. Martin Parish Sheriff's Department, he is considered dead, a victim of the swamp. But not of a simple drowning. He was a victim of something else, something ancient and malevolent that lurks in the dark, murky waters of the Atchafalaya Basin. Deputy LeBlanc eventually left the department, unable to cope with the memory of that night, with the image of Girard walking into the darkness. He moved away and never returned to Louisiana. The story of Henri Girard's disappearance became a cautionary tale, a dark legend whispered among the deputies who patrol the bayou, a reminder that some nights the swamp takes, and it does not give back. No trace of Sergeant Henri Girard was ever found, save for his radio, which logged one final, indecipherable sound from the swamp. The silence that follows a disappearance can be deafening, a void where a voice used to be. But sometimes, the airwaves themselves carry whispers of the departed, fragmented messages from a place we are not meant to hear. Our next story examines one such instance, a ghost in the machine that spoke of a terror just beneath the surface. It was the early morning of October 31st, 2008, when Deputy Raymond Boudreau wrapped up a surprisingly uneventful Halloween shift in Iberia Parish. A few prank calls, a couple noise complaints, nothing unusual. He was driving south on Highway 14, the air cool and smelling of burning cane, classic rock low on the radio. At 3 a.m., he was thinking only about coffee and sleep. Then he saw it. A brilliant white light hovered low on the eastern horizon over the Atchafalaya Basin. Too bright for a star, too still for a helicopter or flare. It didn't pulse, move, or drift. It simply hung there, as if fixed in the sky. Boudreau slowed, watching it for nearly a minute. It never changed. He radioed dispatch. Unit 12, observing a bright stationary light. No sound, no navigation markers. Dispatch reported no aircraft in the area. Boudreau pulled over, wanting to study it carefully. As he spoke, the light began to descend, slowly at first, then with incredible speed, streaking toward the swamp. Dispatch, the object is descending rapidly, he reported, forcing calm into his voice. The light fell until it illuminated the tops of the distant cypress trees, then stopped dead. It hovered again, only 100 feet above the wetlands. And now it had changed. No longer white, but a deep, pulsing red, glowing like a warning beacon suspended in the dark. For a moment it hung there, silent and unnatural. Then it shot straight upward, accelerating so fast it became a speck and then vanished entirely. The whole maneuver lasted less than 30 seconds. Boudreau sat frozen behind the wheel, stunned. Nothing he knew, no aircraft, no drone, no natural phenomenon, could move like that. Dispatch, he said finally, his voice unsteady. The object has departed the area, straight up, disappeared. The FAA confirmed. No radar contacts, no civilian, no military, nothing. Back at the station, Boudreau filed an official report. His supervisor, Captain Leroy, listened without interrupting. When the story was done, the captain sighed. Raymond, this parish has been my whole life. I've heard things in the swamp that don't fit in the manual, seen lights no one could explain. We write the report, we log it, and then we move on. Some things out here aren't meant to be understood. The report, labeled Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon, was stored in a basement cabinet, its details reduced to a few factual lines. Time, location, movement pattern, color change, FAA confirmation of no traffic. It gathered dust for years. Boudreau never spoke of it again. But he never forgot. In the months that followed, he found himself looking up more often than before, scanning the sky for that impossible light. He never saw it again, but he never stopped feeling that it was still out there, somewhere above the quiet fields and dark waters of Iberia Parish. That night's log remains a small, cryptic footnote, a reminder that even the suave's most familiar American landscapes hold mysteries just outside our understanding. Because sometimes the most unsettling encounters don't happen in the woods or on lonely roads. They happen in the open sky, witnessed by someone trained to observe, report, and explain. And sometimes, there is no explanation. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable. We have journeyed tonight through the waterlogged world of the Louisiana Bayou, guided by the cold, factual words of official radio logs. These recordings, these fragmented transmissions, are more than just data. They are echoes of terror, preserved in magnetic tape and digital files. They are the voices of trained professionals, deputies, dispatchers, and rangers, who found themselves in situations that defied their training and shattered their understanding of the world. From the phantom on the highway near St. Martinville, to the whispering reeds of Grand Lake, to the impossible light that danced in the Iberia Parish sky, these accounts share a common thread. They speak of encounters with the unknown, with things that have no name and no explanation. They are stories of disappearance, of auditory phenomena, of entities seen only in fleeting glimpses. They are stories that end not with a resolution, but with a lingering silence, a void where answers should be. The Bayou, with its ancient, cypress-choked waterways and its impenetrable darkness, is a place where the veil between our world and another feels thin, a place where the past is never truly dead, and the unknown is always just beneath the surface. These logs are a testament to the courage of those who patrol these lonely roads and waterways, the men and women who face the darkness, both human and otherwise, every time they put on the uniform. They are a reminder that our world is stranger and more complex than our manuals and procedures allow for. The static on the radio, the shape in the mirror, the figure at the water's edge. These are not just ghost stories. They are documented events, recorded in real time by credible witnesses. They are a part of the hidden history of this country, a history that is not written in books, but whispered in the dark. The silence that follows these stories is as important as the stories themselves. It is a silence filled with questions, with the weight of what is unsaid and unknown. It is the silence of a missing deputy's last transmission, the silence of a deserted road after a phantom vanishes, the silence of a radio channel after a child's final scream. It is in this silence that the true horror lies, not in the gore or the violence, but in the quiet, cold realization that we are not always in control, that there are forces at work in this world that we cannot comprehend. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, especially one preserved in an official log or recording, leave it in the comments below. The files are always open, and there are always more stories to tell. The darkness holds many secrets, and sometimes those secrets find a way to make themselves heard. Thank you for watching Snowbound Screams. Until next time, stay safe out there.